The morning sun cast long shadows across Westminster Abbey as Prince William stood before his bedroom mirror, adjusting his ceremonial uniform for what felt like the 100th time. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed the gold braiding on his chest. Today was different from any other royal event he had attended. Today he would be crowned King of England. Catherine entered the room quietly, her own coronation gown rustling softly against the marble floor. She noticed the tension in her husband's shoulders immediately. They had been married for over a decade, and she could read his emotions better than anyone else in the world. "The children are asking for you," she said gently, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "George wants to know if he can wear his toy crown today." William smiled for the first time that morning. Their eldest son had been practicing his coronation. Walk for weeks, marching around Kensington Palace with a plastic crown perched on his head. Charlotte had been equally excited, spending hours drawing pictures of the ceremony, while little Louis had mostly been interested in whether there would be cake afterward. The weight of the moment pressed down on William's chest like a heavy stone. His grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, had passed away just 8 months earlier, leaving behind a legacy that seemed impossible to match. His father, King Charles III, had ruled for only a brief period before illness forced him to step down, making William's ascension to the throne earlier than anyone had expected. "I keep thinking about grandmother," William confessed to Catherine, his voice barely above a whisper. "She made it look so effortless, so natural. What if I'm not ready for this?" Catherine moved closer, straightening his collar with practice. "Hans, your grandmother was nervous too, you know. She was only 25 when she was crowned. You have more experience, more preparation, and most importantly, you have the love of the people." Through the palace windows, they could already hear the distant sounds of crowds gathering along the processional route. Thousands of people had camped overnight on the streets of London, hoping to catch a glimpse of their new king. The excitement in the air was palpable. But so was the enormous responsibility that came with wearing the crown. William's mind wandered to his mother, Princess Diana, and how proud she would have been to see this day. He touched the sapphire ring on Catherine's finger, his mother's engagement ring, and felt a surge of strength. Diana had taught him the importance of connecting with people, of showing genuine emotion and vulnerability, even in the most formal circumstances. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His private secretary entered with a gentle bow, announcing that the Archbishop of Canterbury had arrived and the procession would begin in 30 minutes. The time for reflection was over. History was about to unfold as they made their way through the palace corridors. William caught sight of himself in one of the ornate mirrors lining the walls. The man looking back at him wore the uniform of a king, but he still felt like the young boy who had walked behind his mother's coffin all those years ago. The transformation from prince to king wasn't just about ceremony and crowns. It was about carrying the hopes and dreams of an entire nation on his shoulders. The sounds from outside grew louder as they approached the palace doors. Somewhere in that crowd were people who had traveled from across the Commonwealth, families who had saved for months to witness this historic moment, and children who would remember this day for the rest of their lives. Catherine squeezed his hand one final time before they would separate for the ceremony. "Remember," she whispered, "they're not crowning a perfect man today. They're crowning someone who cares deeply about serving others. That's what matters." The palace doors opened, and the roar of the crowd washed over them like a wave. William stepped forward into the golden morning light, ready to begin the most important journey of his life. The boy who had once been second in line to the throne was about to become King William V, and the world was watching. The golden state coach rolled through the streets of London like something from a fairy tale, but inside, William felt anything but royal. The ancient carriage swayed and bounced with each turn, and despite the plush velvet seats, he found himself gripping the armrests to steady himself. The crown jewels, carefully secured beside him, caught the sunlight streaming through the ornate windows, casting rainbow patterns across the coach's interior. Outside, the crowds were unlike anything London had seen in decades. People pressed against the barriers, waving flags and cheering with such enthusiasm that their voices rose above the clip-clop of the horses' hooves. Children sat perched on their father's shoulders, their faces painted with Union Jacks, while elderly spectators wiped tears from their eyes as the coach passed by. Look at them, William thought to himself, watching a young girl blow him a kiss from the sidewalk. They believe in this institution, in this moment, in me. The responsibility felt overwhelming, but there was something else too, a growing sense of purpose that surprised him with its intensity. Through the coach window, he could see familiar faces in the crowd. There was Mrs. Henderson, the widow from Wales, whose community garden he had helped establish 3 years ago. She held up a homemade sign that read "Our King William" in shaky handwriting. Next to her stood a group of veterans from his military, Charity, still standing at attention despite their age, saluting as the coach passed. The route to Westminster Abbey had been planned for maximum impact, taking the procession through some of London's most historic neighborhoods. As they turned onto Whitehall, William caught sight of the Cenotaph War Memorial, where he had laid wreaths every Remembrance Day for years. Today it was surrounded by flowers left by ordinary citizens, spontaneous tribute that hadn't been part of any official plan. His phone, tucked discreetly in his pocket, buzzed with a text message from his brother Harry, who was watching the ceremony from California. "Mom would be so proud," the message read, accompanied by a photo of Harry's children wearing paper crowns they had made themselves. Despite their complicated relationship in recent years, this moment felt bigger than any family disagreements. Coach slowed as it approached Parliament Square, where a particularly large crowd had gathered. William noticed a group of school children from East London, their teacher pointing excitedly as the coach came into view. These were kids from one of the most disadvantaged areas of the city, and seeing them here, dressed in their best clothes, and beaming with excitement, reminded him why he had always been drawn to working with young people. As Westminster Abbey came into view, its Gothic spires reaching toward the cloudy London sky, William felt his heart rate quicken. This was the same church where he had married Catherine, where his mother's funeral had been held, where countless kings and queens before him had been crowned. The weight of history pressed down on him, but instead of feeling crushed, he found himself standing straighter. The crowds around the Abbey were the densest yet, people packed so tightly that the police barriers bowed under the pressure. Someone in the crowd started singing "God Save the King," and within moments, thousands of voices had joined in. The sound was so powerful it seemed to make the ancient stones of the Abbey vibrate inside the coach. William closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. He thought about his training as a pilot, how he had learned to stay calm under pressure, to trust his preparation and instincts. Today would require all of those skills and more. The coach began to slow as it approached the Abbey's west entrance. Through the crowd, William could see the red carpet that had been rolled out for the occasion, lined with guardsmen in their full ceremonial dress. Television cameras from around the world were positioned at every angle, ready to capture every moment of what was being called the most significant coronation in over 70 years. As the coach came to a complete stop, William could hear the Abbey bells beginning to ring, their ancient bronze voices calling out across London and beyond. In moments, he would step out of this coach as a prince and walk into the Abbey to emerge as a king.
Oh.
The transformation was about to begin, and millions of people around the world were watching, waiting to witness history in the making. The moment William's foot touched the red carpet outside Westminster Abbey, a hush fell over the massive crowd. It was as if thousands of people had collectively held their breath, understanding they were witnessing something extraordinary. The silence lasted only seconds before erupting into the loudest cheer. London had heard since the end of World War II. William paused at the Abbey's entrance. Turning slightly to acknowledge the crowd, this simple gesture, unscripted and spontaneous, sent a ripple of excitement through the spectators. Camera phones held high captured the moment from every conceivable angle. But it was the expression on William's face that would later break. The internet, a mixture of humility, determination, and genuine emotion that felt refreshingly human for such a formal occasion. Catherine appeared beside him, having arrived in her own state coach, and together they stood for a moment, taking in the magnitude of the scene before them. Her coronation gown, designed by Sarah Burton, caught the light beautifully, but it was the way she looked at her husband that photographers around the world would focus on later with a blend of pride, love, and unwavering support that spoke volumes about their partnership. Inside the Abbey, 2,000 guests had been carefully selected from every corner of British society. Yes, there were the expected heads of state, politicians, and nobility, but William had insisted on including teachers, healthcare workers, charity volunteers, and young people who represented the future of the kingdom. In the front rows sat his 3 children. George looking serious in his miniature formal wear, Charlotte practically bouncing with excitement, and Louis trying his best to sit still despite his age. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, greeted William at the Abbey's entrance with words that had been spoken to monarchs for over 1,000 years, yet somehow felt fresh and meaningful in this moment. As they began the slow, processional walk down the nave, the Abbey's choir began singing, their voices soaring up to the ancient vaulted ceiling and creating an atmosphere that felt both sacred and celebratory. Every step William took was steeped in tradition, yet he managed to bring something uniquely his own to the moment. When a small boy in the congregation waved at him, William smiled and gave a subtle wave back, a gesture that would later be shared millions of times on social media. When he passed a group of military veterans, he paused briefly to nod in acknowledgement. Remembering his own years of service, the coronation chair, used for the crowning of English monarchs since 1308, waited at the high altar. As William approached it, he couldn't help but think of all the kings and queens who had sat in this same chair, facing their own moments of transformation. Some had been great leaders, others had struggled with the weight of the crown, but all had been human beings taking on an extraordinary responsibility. The ceremony itself was a masterful blend of ancient ritual and modern relevance. The Archbishop's words spoke of service, duty, and the sacred trust between monarch and people. But they were delivered in language that felt accessible and meaningful to contemporary audiences. When William was asked to take the coronation oath, his voice was clear and strong, carrying easily throughout the Abbey and to the millions watching around the world. But it was during the anointing ceremony, traditionally the most sacred part of the coronation, that something unexpected happened. As the Archbishop prepared the holy oil, a shaft of sunlight suddenly broke through the Abbey's stained glass windows, illuminating William in what many would later describe as an almost divine moment. The timing was perfect, unplanned, and absolutely magical. The congregation fell silent as William was anointed with oil from the Mount of Olives, continuing a tradition that connected him to centuries of Christian kingship. But even in this most solemn moment, his humanity shone through. When a drop of the oil rolled down his forehead, he didn't maintain rigid composure. Instead, there was a slight, almost imperceptible smile that suggested he understood the profound absurdity and wonder of what was happening to him. Young Prince George, watching from the front row, later told his friends at school that this was the moment when his father looked like a real king for the first time. It was a child's observation, but it captured something essential about the transformation taking place. William wasn't just putting on the trappings of monarchy. He was growing into them, becoming something larger than himself, while somehow remaining authentically who he was. The moment had arrived. The St. Edward's crown, weighing nearly 5 pounds and encrusted with precious stones collected over centuries, was lifted high above William's head. The entire Abbey held its breath as the Archbishop of Canterbury prepared to place it upon the head of England's new king. Television cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail of the ancient crown's intricate design. But it was William's expression that captivated viewers around the world. As the crown descended toward his head, William closed his eyes briefly. Later, he would tell Catherine that in that moment, he felt the presence of every monarch who had worn the crown before him, as if their collective wisdom and experience were flowing into him. When the weight of the crown settled on his brow, his eyes opened with a clarity and determination that hadn't been there moments before. "God save the King," rang out through the Abbey, first from the Archbishop, then taken up by the entire congregation. The sound was thunderous, reverberating off the ancient stones and seeming to shake the very foundations of the building.
Outside,
the crowds who had been listening to the ceremony on loudspeakers erupted in celebration, their cheers echoing through the streets of London and beyond. But it was what happened next that would truly break the internet. As William turned to face the congregation for the first time as their crowned king, his gaze found his children in the front row. Prince George, now heir to the throne, stood solemnly and bowed to his father, a moment of protocol that should have felt formal. Instead, William's composure cracked slightly, and he mouthed the words, "I love you," to his son, a gesture so natural and paternal that it reminded everyone watching that beneath the crown and ceremony was a father who adored his children, Princess. Charlotte, unable to contain her excitement any longer, clapped her hands together and beamed at her father, while little Prince Louis pointed at the crown and whispered loudly enough for the microphones to pick up. "Papa looks funny." The comment drew gentle laughter from the congregation and would later become one of the most beloved moments of the entire ceremony. Shared endlessly on social media with captions about the humanizing power of children, Catherine, watching from her own throne beside William, felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had known this day would come eventually, but seeing her husband transformed into a king while remaining so fundamentally himself was overwhelming. When their eyes met across the altar, he gave her the smallest wink, a private moment of connection that the cameras caught, and that would be analyzed and celebrated by royal watchers for years to come. The ceremony continued with the presentation of the royal regalia, the scepter, the orb, and the ring, each item carrying its own centuries of history and symbolism. But William handled each piece with a naturalness that surprised even seasoned royal commentators. There was no stiffness or obvious awareness of the cameras. Instead, he seemed to inhabit the role completely, as if he had been preparing for this moment his entire life, which of course he had. When it came time for the homage, where senior members of the royal family and nobility would pledge their loyalty to the new king, William made an unexpected decision. Instead of simply receiving the traditional words of fealty, he stepped down from the throne and embraced each person who came forward. This break with protocol sent a clear message about the kind of king he intended to be: approachable, warm, and connected to his people. The most moving moment came when his uncle, the Duke of York, stepped forward to pledge his loyalty. The two men had grown closer in recent years, especially after the difficulties the royal family had faced. When Andrew spoke the ancient words of homage, William placed a hand on his uncle's shoulder and said quietly, but loud enough for the microphones to catch, "Thank you for always being there." It was a moment of family reconciliation that spoke to William's capacity for forgiveness and his understanding that the monarchy was stronger. When the family was united, as the ceremony moved toward its conclusion, William found himself looking out over the congregation and feeling something he hadn't expected, a profound sense of peace. The anxiety and nervousness that had plagued him for weeks had evaporated, replaced by a calm certainty about his purpose and his ability to serve his people well. The crown, which had felt impossibly heavy when first placed on his head, now seemed to fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for him all along. As King William V emerged from Westminster Abbey, crown gleaming in the afternoon sunlight, something extraordinary happened that no protocol manual could have prepared anyone for. The crowd, which had been respectfully enthusiastic throughout the morning, erupted into a celebration that bordered on pandemonium. But it wasn't just the volume of their cheers that was remarkable. It was the genuine joy and emotion visible. On every face in the crowd, Sarah Martinez, a teacher from Manchester who had saved for months to bring her family to London for the coronation, found herself crying uncontrollably as the newly crowned king appeared. "I don't even know why I'm crying," she would later tell reporters. But there was something about the way he looked, so humble, so grateful, so ready to serve us. It felt like hope was walking out of that church. The procession back to Buckingham Palace took on a carnival atmosphere that surprised even the most experienced royal correspondents. Somewhere along the mall, someone started singing Sweet Caroline, and within minutes, thousands of voices had joined in, turning the solemn return journey into an impromptu street party. William, riding in the Golden State coach with Catherine beside him, could be seen laughing and clapping along, completely abandoning royal reserve in favor of genuine human connection. At one point during the procession, the coach slowed near. A group of elderly residents from a local care home, who had been given special viewing positions. William, spotting them, asked the driver to stop completely and rolled down the coach window to speak directly to them. "Thank you for coming out today," he called to them. "This belongs to all of us." The gesture, entirely unplanned, was captured by dozens of cameras and would become one of the most shared moments of the entire day. But it was the moment when 8-year-old Lily Thompson, who had been battling leukemia and had been granted a special wish to attend the coronation, called out King William, that truly captured hearts around the world. The newly crowned king heard her voice above the crowd, located her in her wheelchair near the barriers, stopped the entire procession to approach her. The conversation that followed lasted only 90 seconds. But it was 90 seconds that would define William's reign from the very beginning. He knelt down to Lily's level, crown and all, and spoke to her as if she were the most important person in the world. "Are you having a good day, Lily?" he asked, having been briefed about her story by his staff. When she nodded enthusiastically and said she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up, William replied, "The world needs more doctors like you're going to be." The image of the King of England in full coronation regalia, kneeling in the street to speak with a sick child, spread across social media faster than any royal content in history. Within hours, #King William was trending globally. But not just in the UK, the hashtag was being used in dozens of languages as people around the world shared their reactions to what many were calling the most human moment in royal history. Television. Viewership numbers were breaking records everywhere. In the United States, more people were watching the coronation than had watched the Super Bowl. In Australia, businesses closed early so employees could watch. In Canada, schools postponed classes to allow students to witness history. The global audience was estimated at over 2 billion people, making it one of the most watched events in television history. But perhaps the most telling reaction came from an unexpected source. Prince Harry, watching from his home in California, posted a simple message on social media: "That's my brother. That's our king. Proud doesn't begin to cover it." The post, the first time Harry had publicly commented on royal affairs in months, garnered millions of likes and shares, suggesting that even family divisions might be beginning to heal in the face of William's evident transformation into a king worthy of respect. Back in London, as the golden coach approached Buckingham Palace, the crowds lining the mall were so dense that police estimated it would take hours for everyone to disperse, but nobody seemed to mind waiting. Street vendors, who had run out of food and drinks, found people sharing their picnics with strangers. Children who had never met were playing together, while their parents chatted about the historic day they had all witnessed. The atmosphere was electric. But it was more than just excitement. It was a sense of collective pride and hope that many Britons hadn't felt in years. Economic troubles, political divisions, and social challenges hadn't disappeared. But for this one perfect day, it felt like the country had remembered what it could be at its best. As evening fell over London, King William V stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, looking out over a sea of faces that stretched as far as the eye could see. The traditional balcony appearance had been scheduled for just 10 minutes, but the crowd's enthusiasm was so infectious that William found himself staying longer. Waving and smiling until his arms ached and his face hurt from grinning, Catherine joined him on the balcony. And when she slipped her hand into his, a cheer went up from the crowd that could be heard for miles. Their children, who had behaved remarkably well throughout the long day, finally let loose with their excitement. Prince George waved regally. Princess Charlotte blew kisses to the crowd, and Prince Louis, true to form, made faces that had everyone laughing. But it was what happened next that would cement this coronation as truly special. Instead of the traditional formal wave and retreat back into the palace, William did something unprecedented. He stepped forward to the microphone that had been set up for a brief address and spoke directly to his people. "Today, you have given me the greatest honor of my life," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed crowd. "But I want you to know that this crown doesn't make me your king. Your trust, your faith, your love, that's what makes me your king. I promise you I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that gift." The words were simple, unscripted, and delivered with such sincerity that they seemed to reach directly into the hearts of everyone listening. In the crowd below, Grown men wiped away tears, elderly women clutched their hearts, and young people held up their phones to capture every word. "We face challenges together," William continued, "but we also face the future together. And I have never been more optimistic about what we can achieve when we stand united. This is not just my coronation. This is our celebration of who we are and who we can become." As he spoke, something magical happened across the city. In pubs and restaurants where people had gathered to watch the day's events, strangers began applauding together. In hospital wards, patients who had been following the coronation from their beds felt a surge of hope they hadn't experienced in months. In schools across the Commonwealth, children who had been given the day off to watch history unfold began to understand that they were witnessing something that would shape their entire lives. The social media response was unprecedented. Within minutes of William's speech, video clips were being shared millions of times. Hashtag Our King began trending alongside hashtag King William, as people from around the world expressed their admiration for a monarch who seemed to understand that his power came not from ancient traditions, but from the consent and love of his people. International leaders who had attended the ceremony as formal guests found themselves genuinely moved by what they had witnessed. The President of France, speaking to reporters, said, "I came here expecting pageantry and tradition. I leave having seen the birth of a new kind of monarchy, one that serves its people rather than expecting to be served." As the evening wore on and the crowd slowly began to disperse, the true impact of the day started to become clear. This hadn't just been a coronation. It had been a national moment of renewal and hope. Social media was flooded with stories of strangers who had become friends while waiting in crowds, of communities that had come together to watch the ceremony, of families who had felt reconnected to something larger than themselves. The economic impact was immediate and substantial. Tourism bookings for the UK surged, with people from around the world wanting to visit the country they had seen celebrating so joyfully. British businesses reported increased confidence, and the pound strengthened against major currencies as international investors expressed renewed faith in the stability and future of the United Kingdom. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on the British people themselves. For years, many had questioned the relevance of the monarchy in the modern world. Young people especially had seemed disconnected from royal traditions that felt outdated and irrelevant to their lives. William's coronation changed that conversation completely. Late that night, as King William V finally removed the St. Edward's crown and placed it carefully back in its case, he reflected on the extraordinary day. The nervous prince who had woken up that morning had been transformed not just by ceremony and ritual, but by the overwhelming love and support of his people. He understood now, in a way he never had before, that being king wasn't about wearing a crown or living in a palace. It was about carrying the hopes and dreams of millions of people and helping them believe in themselves and their country. The coronation of King William V had indeed broken the internet, but more importantly, it had healed something in the heart of a nation and reminded the world that in an age of division and cynicism, authentic leadership and genuine human connection could still move mountains and millions of hearts.